Nero Fubsworth is a hill dwarf who has an intense love for fungi. After his parents died of natural causes when he was young, he noticed how the fungi grew and life was created from the death that he was so upset about. From this experience, he gained a new understanding and appreciation of life, and he chooses to live his life in the best way he knows how, relaxed, content, and full of love. In this video, I'll be going over how to build and play Nero in most tabletop role-playing games, but more specifically, D&D. Our topics will be as follows: personality, class and race, ability scores, proficiencies and feats, and gear. As always, Nero and his story can be played a lot of different ways. You can choose to have him follow any sort of path after his interactions with Talia, or even after his first experience with his fungi. These are merely my suggestions and how I originally saw the character when I first created it. Feel free to adapt and overcome as you see fit. Part 1. Personality. Now first, we gotta talk about Nero's personality. His likes, dislikes, how he treats people, and things like that. For Nero, the answer is very simple. Unrelenting optimism and positivity, even in the face of the worst things imaginable. Nero is unshaken. As he himself said in the story, he no longer fears death. He has accepted life and death as a cycle and chooses to live his life knowing that no matter the consequences, he has lived as happy and content as he can be. To his friends, he is a wise confidant who they can tell their troubles, and he will do what he can to help. To new people, he's a friendly gentleman who makes everyone he can walk away with a smile on their face. One thing Nero loves is to listen to stories. He can sit and listen all day if needed. He's a very attentive listener, with gasps and exclamations as the story gets interesting. And it's all genuine. He knows that he will never get to see or experience everything in the world, and so he loves to hear what other people say. Something that Nero dislikes is seeing anyone, but especially people he cares about, upset. He can help with anxiety and things like that, no problem, but nothing he can do will heal a broken heart, and he wishes he could help more. Nero has decided, after meeting Talia, that he wants to go on adventures and see as much of the world as he can. So make sure to keep his sense of wonder and adventure in mind as you go to new places and meet new people. Part 2. Class and race. As I said in the intro, Nero is a hill dwarf. He was raised in a village with his family, but after his parents died, he moved away from the village to live his life among the plants. For Nero's class, if you know D&D very well, you could probably guess that Nero is a druid. Druids are people connected with nature who respect plants and animals to the utmost and gain magic from these connections. For his subclass, Nero will be a Circle of Spores druid. These druids specifically are familiar with fungi and use spores to deal damage to an enemy without even touching them. I really like this idea, thematically and mechanically, and I love the idea of Nero not ever really having to attack enemies, but instead punishing them for choosing to continue to fight him. His spells, in my original vision, would always revolve around utility, stopping the enemy from hurting him or adding to his defenses, all while the enemy get hurt just for attacking him. If you have any other questions about spells or things like that, they will always be answered in the character sheets in the description. The character sheets will be from 1st level all the way up to 5th level, and any questions past that will just have to be choices you make for yourself. Part 3. Ability scores. As always, when we talk about ability scores, we need to be careful. There are tons of different ways you can figure out your scores, so instead of giving you straight numbers, I will give each stat a rating and order from 1 to 6, so you know which scores to prioritize the most. First and most important for Nero's stats is his constitution. In my head, Nero is designed to be in the front line, tanking as much damage for his team as possible. Because of that, he is going to need lots of health. He's also a dwarf who is naturally good at constitution, so at the end of the day, this stat just needs to be as high as possible. The second most important stat for Nero is wisdom. Wisdom is the spellcasting ability for druids, and so it's going to be an important stat for Nero to be good at what he wants to do. Wisdom will buff his damage, his healing, basically everything he does. It is almost as important as his constitution. In third place is charisma. Nero is good at talking to people and wants to make them enjoy their life. Because of this, he cannot have a very low charisma, or else he would not be a good person to talk to, or he wouldn't be someone who seems friendly as you walk by on the street. Because of this, we want Nero to have a decent charisma score. In fourth place is strength. While Nero will be most of the time dealing damage via spells or his spores, he'll also be using his staff, or just his unarmed attacks fairly often. Because of this, we want him to have an above average strength score. And lastly, we have a tie for the least important statistic for Nero between intelligence and dexterity. Nero has lived a very decent portion of his life away from society, and so naturally is not very educated. He's also a stout, bulky dwarf, who is not known for being very agile. If you are doing point buy and are choosing a dump stat, my personal recommendation would be dexterity. Part 4, Proficiencies and Feats. Now it is time to get into some kind of the nitty-gritty choices that you'll have to make for Nero that aren't necessarily spelled out for you in his story. These are, of course, his proficiencies and his feats. Most of your starting proficiencies come from your race and class, but in D&D, some of them also come from your background. There are tons of options for backgrounds, and a lot of them work for Nero's character, so I'm not going to be going over them here. If you want to know what background I chose, it'll be on the character sheets in the description for you to see. The answer is Hermit. From being a druid, Nero gets to choose 2 skill proficiencies from Arcana, Animal Handling, Insight, Medicine, Nature, Perception, Religion, and Survival. From these 2, the 2 that best fit Nero will be Insight and Nature. These are both skills that Nero should be naturally good at based on his backstory, and are also skills that he will use fairly often. Some people may choose to replace Nature with Perception, as Perception gets rolled way more often than almost any other skill, but I personally like Nature more. As a dwarf, Nero also gets to pick a tool proficiency from the Smith's Tools, Brewer's Supplies, or Mason's Tools. For this choice, I like the Brewer's Supplies proficiency. It works well, as brewing is kind of all about using plants and fermenting them, which is kind of in line with his story. For feats, there's really only 2 options that work well for Nero. First is the Tough feat. This feat will give Nero 2 extra health every time he levels up, which might not be a lot on its own, but a boost to health is a boost to health. The second option for Nero's feat is Sentinel. This feat allows him to keep the enemy focused on him, and since he will be using his spores to deal damage every turn, he can keep his enemy locked in place for as long as he wants to. Part 5, Gear. Our last section for Nero is his starting gear. Through your background and class, you get some choices for what starting gear you want to have. As a druid, there are actually only 2 choices that Nero needs to make. Between a wooden shield and a simple weapon, Nero will choose to get the wooden shield, of course, covered in moss and small mushrooms. For the second choice between a scimitar and a simple weapon, Nero is going to pick a simple weapon. That weapon being his trusty quarterstaff, of course covered in moss and fungus, like everything he owns is. The last thing that I'd like to mention about Nero's staff is that it's also his druidic focus, and on one end of it, it comes to a point where there's a large fungus, specifically a parrot wax cap mushroom, which is this very glossy green mushroom that kind of looks like a gem, and that's what he uses specifically as his focus. There really isn't any other gear worth mentioning for Nero. If there's a better option for armor than the leather he starts with, like hide or something like that, it might be a good idea to invest. But there really aren't any weapons or armor that he needs. Any magic item that could raise his defense or health would obviously be welcome additions to his equipment, but other than that, he really isn't that interested in any material possessions, choosing instead to spend his money on his friends and experiences. Alrighty, guildmates, that's all I have to say when it comes to building Nero Fubsworth in D&D. As always, there will be character sheets from levels 1 to 5 in the description below. Hopefully any questions you have can be answered there, but if not, you can comment down below and I will also try my best to answer any questions there. Feel free to use Nero as an NPC, your own character as a villain, which would be kind of hard for you to do, but whatever floats your boat. For now, this meeting of the Lorekeepers Guild will be adjourned. Until the next time I see you all, be on the lookout for stories worth listening to, and send any you find to me in the comments below. I'm your Guildmaster, and until next time, remember, ad astra per fabulous.